Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, welcome to this week's Chasing Giants podcast. This is Don Higgins and Terry Peer coming back at you for episode 278 that will air on June 22nd. Don, it's been a busy week for both of us, but the talk this whole summer has always been about the weather. And the last couple episodes, we were wet, then we were dry. We were asking for heat. I want to start this show off talking about how you've missed some crucial rains here the last week, and the heat's getting ready to turn up.
Yeah, we had a couple of fronts pass through and bring rain, but I think we got a total of 3 tenths. And just a little bit north of us, a little bit south of us, that seems to get it. Just the front seemed to split and miss us. I mean, around us we'll get 1.5 inches. We'll get a 1/2 inch, and it's been on that pattern for a while now. So we could use a good rain. The 3 tenths we got this week came with some pretty strong winds and blew our corn over, but it's standing back up now a couple days later. And the heat we've been wanting is going to be here, though, starting tomorrow. Temperatures in the mid-90s for at least the next 5 days. So I'll probably be sitting in front of the computer doing some inside work for most of the day.
Yeah, that's a little warm unless you're in a cab tractors. I got a bunch of round bales in before we got rain earlier this week before heading out of town, and we got torrential downpours yesterday. There was rivers in the people's yards. It came down so hard, but we have the same heat coming in. So how tall is your corn right now?
Most of it's around knee high.
Yeah,
some's a little shorter, some's a little taller.
I'm at the verge because of the equipment that I have. I'm at the verge where I need to spray if I'm going to spray. So my goal on Saturday, this podcast will come out on Sunday. My goal tomorrow is that's short enough that I can still drive over it with my side-by-side and not hurt the corn and get one good dose of Mike's Mighty Micros on all of my corn. And while I have it mixed up, I'll spray the soybeans and clover also. But once it gets past that, just below your knee, I don't have a big sprayer. Actually, I'm not sure, do I have a sprayer or not? But we tried to do a sprayer swap that didn't work out as planned this week, but I don't have one for my tractor yet. So I'm using my side-by-side. Will you spray your corn with your tractor before it gets much taller?
No, my corn, I let it go. I get my pre-emergent herbicide down the day I plant, and when I pull out of the field, I'll plant and then immediately put the sprayer on same day, spray right over that bare dirt that I just planted into with my pre-emergent herbicide, and I also put some liquid nitrogen down at the same time with it, and I never go into my corn again. But this week I did spray my soybeans. I had a plot that was getting some browse pressure, and I was trying a new deer deterrent. I wanted to get that sprayed on there. And while I was at it, I just mixed in my glyphosate to get the little weeds that were just coming on. And I put Mike's Mighty Micros. So I was spraying 3 things at once: the glyphosate for the weeds, the deer repellent to see if I could keep the deer off for a little bit, and then the Mike's Mighty Micros. And I'll tell you, I went back about 3 days after I sprayed, and it looked like them soybean plants had doubled in size in 3 days. I think a big part of it was just getting the stinking deer off of that plot. Letting those plants recover, but I could definitely see a definite growth spurt with that Mike's Mighty Micro sprayed on them. So we got the 3 tenths of rain like a day and a half after I sprayed, and I've been kind of monitoring the plot to see if I could catch any deer browsing in it. And if I do, I'm going to spray it again with more deer deterrent and see what happens there. But you got to keep the deer off them soybean plots when they're small. If you can keep them off for the first 45, 60 days, then your soybeans are typically at a stage where they can withstand some browse pressure. Now, that obviously that's going to depend on how many deer, but on my place that's just been the case. And I will say that I don't have the browse pressure this year that I've had in the past, and I think it's from shooting all those does last fall and winter. So I'm going to continue that doe program based on what I'm seeing in the field this fall, but plan on shooting several does again.
Yep. I'm really interested to see how our testing does with this deer repellent. I was with you when you went to pick it up the other day, and we'll see how it goes. Probably got a little bit of testing before we're ready to talk more about it, but always trying to find something that's going to be a benefit to a habitat and land manager. It never stops, to be honest with you. But yeah, we'll see how it definitely works. I want to save the segment after Osseo today to talk about some observations that you got from a taxidermist. But before we go to the break, why don't we talk a little bit about your corn meeting?
Yeah, so with Green Prairie, we had a meeting this week with a corn expert, I guess I would call him, guy that does a lot of breeding. And, we've got our own guy, Mike Van Osdal, there at Green Prairie. He's been with Kitchen Seed for decades and has been the main go-to guy with corn. But we had another outside guy in, and the interesting thing for me in this, I learned a lot in the meeting, to be honest. I mean, I was asking a lot of questions because it was kind of eye-opening. And the biggest thing that struck me is that the marketing gimmicks and such that we see in the hunting industry that you and I make fun of from time to time, call them garbage, whatever.
Garbage.
I realize there's some of that in the farming industry, but I didn't realize just how prevalent it was.
Really?
And one thing I learned was these big seed companies, I'm not going to mention any seed company by name, but these big ag seed companies have such a presence and such a following that actually the national corn average, the national average of corn yield is brought down 10 bushels per acre because of one big player who has such a following that such a high percentage of the corn acres gets planted in this one company's seed, and yet that company's seed is basically inferior to a lot of others. But the company's following, because the company's following, so many farmers buy it that it brings the national average down by 10 bushels an acre. I found that absolutely amazing.
That's a lot of corn. I mean,
that is amazing. Yep.
10 bushels an acre countrywide. That's a lot of corn.
Yep. And the way it was explained to me in this meeting is, so you've got these really big players in the ag seed side, and then you've got these smaller privately owned seed companies. And in a lot of times in the local test plots where they plant, all these different varieties from different companies and side by side in a field, a test field, side by side, and then they harvest and they compare yields and they publish that data, that typically these smaller privately owned companies will do very well and a lot of times win those side by side comparisons. But so what happens is these bigger companies, a company's not going to have 100 different varieties of corn in their offering, their lineup. They're going to have a number of different varieties, but it's not going to be dozens and hundreds. And each variety has a specific region and soil type and situation where it does best, whether it's, well-drained bottomland, rich bottomland soil, or irrigated fields, or maybe more upland, lighter timber type soils. And the big companies, they try to pick varieties in their offering that do well over a wider geographic area.
Okay.
So, and these smaller privately owned companies, they will have varieties that are very specific to their local region.
Sure.
And that's why they do so well in the side-by-side trials, is because their varieties are better suited to that specific situation. And they still only have, so many varieties that they offer as well, but the varieties that they offer are suited for their region, where the big companies are trying to cover a wider geographic area. And all this was brand new to me, and just listening to this guy talk, this is not my opinion. This is what was shared to me this week. So if any of the listeners get fired up and want to fire off some hate mail or comments, that's fine. I'm just repeating what I was told this week, and
this wasn't a guy that's tied to any of those big companies. He's just stating the fact as a breeder.
And this breeder works for a lot of different companies. And I mean, he's got his varieties in a lot of different bags. And so I didn't see any reason for him to promote one over the other. Very knowledgeable, lots of integrity. You know, he wasn't like sharing secrets of other companies or anything, but he was just giving us a basic understanding of the corn seed industry. And I thought, to me, and I brought this up in the meeting, it reminds me of the whole Angus cattle, Angus beef marketing program that Angus does. And they've done a fantastic job of it. If you go to the sale barn and you sell black calves or you sell calves of any other color, the black calves are going to bring you more money every single time. And so they've created this, I don't even know how to describe it, this idea that black cattle are better. They cut better, they hang better, they got a better carcass, they grow better, more feed efficient, the whole 9 yards. And it's just not true. Now, black cattle are great cattle. Don't get me wrong. There are some great black cattle. But there's also great cattle and all the other breeds that'll stand right with them. And when you take them to the slaughterhouse and you pull the hide off of them, nobody can tell the difference. Nobody. So it's been marketing that's done that to the black cattle. And I guess the same thing happens. And the farmers have basically bought into it enough that now they have to buy into it. Because if a guy's running, 200 or 300 head of beef cows, we're using a black bull versus another breed of bull. It's a lot of money to him. When it comes time to sell those calves, that's a lot of money in his pocket if those calves are black. So they've created a situation where the cattle breeder almost has to use a black bull to get black calves. And I just found it real interesting, the parallels with the farming industry and the hunting industry and how big a role marketing plays in it. And the more I think about it, that marketing probably plays a role in every business to some degree. But I just assumed that farmers could see through all that and, not buy into it like the deer hunter. I thought the deer hunter was way more naive than the farmer, and I'm not sure that's the case anymore.
And maybe not. I think it just goes to show that as a consumer, no matter what you're buying, you need to do your research versus just fall for what the advertising says. Good advertising is great. We try to do a great job with what we do, but yeah, you gotta be an educated consumer and not drink the Kool-Aid, right?
Yeah, and I'm sure there's people listening to this podcast right now that know a whole lot more about the ag industry and specifically the corn side of things than I do. I'm just repeating what I heard in a meeting this week, but I found it very interesting, and the parallel with the hunting industry was very interesting. So I don't know, leave a comment below if you think I'm off my rocker.
Those conversations are pivotal to what we're trying to do for deer hunters that want to have that little bit of edge of a product that's going to attract or keep a deer. Mm-hmm. And the more conversations that we have like that we can regurgitate and use as education pieces for our listeners, I think it's better. But yeah, if you got insight on this side of the business, and we obviously would love to learn. So leave a comment down below. Joe Miles, I wanted to try to get him on this week, but due to my travel schedule, I gave Don a very, very last minute narrow window to record this week. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that. But big news out of Osseo this week. On last Monday, they announced the new pattern. And if you guys haven't seen this, it's quite interesting. He basically took other predators, other animals that have to basically hide, and morph this in. And really what's going to happen is I got quite a few phone calls and text that I had to call Joe and get a clarification on. Our camo that we use in the tree, that is still going to be available. But there's a lot of hunters that want to go out west and stalk elk, and they have different conditions where they want something look a little bit different to blend in for being on the ground, and that's what this is for. So when you go to the Osseo Gear website, just check out the different patterns, and kind of now you have a choice based on your hunting style and where you want to hunt. So excited for Joe to continue to grow his business. and we're very thankful for him, but I want to get him on the show to talk more about the details of these. And he's got new products coming out that are now available for pre-sale. They'll be in before hunting season, but they're available now. So if you want to go there and check that out, a reminder that our consulting clients do get a discount. So if you don't know what that is, reach out to Don or I or your consultant, and we'll be right back. But yeah, I can't wait to hear more from Joe and the product line and him killing that big cat. I did talk to Chris Yates off subject before this. He's flying home, and you should see the trip that he had. So I'm excited for him. He had a great trip over in Africa. So we'll be right back.
Osseo Gear introduces a premium line of bow hunting gear that is unmatched, pairing nature's finest camouflage with the best technological innovations. Osseo Gear brings whitetail bow hunters the gear they need to be the best at their craft. The unique camouflage mimics the intricate feather pattern of North America's greatest predatory creatures. Designed for invisibility, built for comfort, and engineered for function. Visit OsseoGear.com. That's ASIO Gear.com to start shopping. Osseo Gear, prepare to be invisible.
Well, we spent a couple minutes before the break talking about observations from a corn meeting. Another observation that I found very interesting with a conversation you had this week. Why don't we dive into this about the size of deer from a taxidermist?
Yeah, I found it very interesting. I went and picked my turkey up at Bork's Taxidermy in Payne, Illinois. Dude does a fantastic job on turkeys and other things as well. But, man, his turkeys are world class. And got my turkey back, and while I was there visiting with Derek, so his dad actually started Bork's Taxidermy, I don't know, decades ago. And then, Derek is probably, 40 or so, and he's kind of taken over the business as his dad is retired. I think his dad still comes and helps some, but what I found really interesting was he was saying that over the years, the deer that they've mounted here in Illinois, that the forms that they've needed when they measure the deer, they measure that distance between the corner of the eye and the nose, corner of the nose or something, to get the right forms. He said that size has shrank over the years, and the typical mature Midwest buck is not as big as he was, say, 30 years ago. And I thought that was extremely interesting. I'd never heard that before.
So he's not saying it's because age structure is smaller. He's saying mature bucks, 5.5 years or older, they're not as big as they used to be.
Their heads are not as big anyway. And I know I'm killing giant deer. I mean, I'm killing deer well over 200 pounds field dressed. But he's saying the heads on these deer are not as big. And as I thought about that, the one theory I had, EHD has become more prevalent, and the southern deer are more resistant to it. And so I'm wondering if some of those, as we lose our northern deer to EHD and have over the past couple of decades, that if some of these southern deer are not moving farther north, and if that might have something to do with it. It's just an idea. I don't have any idea if there's any validity to it or not, but I can't think of any other explanation of why a deer's head, why they are getting smaller over time.
Well, I can make two assumptions. Number one, there's going to be a lot of opinions on this, and I can't wait to see all the comments down below. But number two, our good friend Dr. Aaron Gaines is probably, his mind is racing about this comment because he listens every week. So I'd put a challenge to our good friend. We haven't had Aaron on in a little while, and I love the segment that he did with us last time. So Aaron, we want to have you back on the podcast again at some point, but one of the topics is it even possible, this observation of the taxidermist, and possible hypothesis for this observation from someone in your line of work? So this is really interesting.
Yeah.
Almost want to ask Strickland too.
Well, I want to throw out there, guys, just like with the corn ideas that I threw out there, those are not mine. I'm just repeating, and this is not mine. I'm just repeating. Every single day, I have multiple conversations with people affiliated with whitetails somehow, and I hear these interesting comments, the things I've never heard before. And these are just two conversations I had this week, one with the corn guy and now this one with the taxidermist. And both very interesting. They're thought-provoking, if nothing else. It makes you wonder why. But I can tell you that on my farm, I'm shooting as big a bodied bucks as I ever have. I mean, the Zacchaeus buck, I'm looking at him right now over the top of my computer. That mount is as big as any in this room. And I would have never came up with that on my own.
I can tell you that the 10-year-old that I shot on your farm, they had to buy 2 different forms and mix and match them. He was so big just to get it to fit. So, and honestly, I don't care if the head's bigger or smaller. I care how big the antlers are.
Right.
I mean, but if it's a health or a herd thing, then yeah, it's thought provoking to say what could that be as a result of that. So you'd almost need statistical data from the form manufacturer to see what sizes were sold and put a bell curve year after year after year to see if that bell curve shifts any, to really know for sure. And I don't know if that data is available. Maybe we have somebody that works for McKinsey, or is it McKinsey that's the form mount, I think?
Yeah.
So maybe we have somebody that works with McKinsey that could do that analysis for us.
It'd be interesting if they could do it like in 10-year increments. Like in 1980, 70% of our forms were this size, 20% were this size, 10% were that. And then in 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020, and in 10-year increments, see how those percentages changed.
All right, all you tens of thousands of people that listen to this show, you got an assignment. If anybody has a connection with the form companies, let's see if we can call in a favor and see if this data is even available, and we'll compare it when we get Aaron on. So it's really thought provoking. It really changes nothing we do for habitat or hunting style, but man, it's interesting. Okay, we're managing and we're growing the biggest deer we've ever grown, but the head's smaller. So
it'd be also interesting if we've got taxidermists listening that have been in business, 40 years, if they could comment, what they've noticed, if they've noticed the same thing or they think this idea is crazy. It'd be nice to hear their opinion, because they're going to have a better idea than just the average listener.
So I'm going to ask a favor. Don and I get more text messages and private messages than we can handle. I actually have gotten to the point I have someone that's responding for me most of the time if somebody sends me a social media message. Please don't start a private text message or phone call discussion on this. Please just comment down below and we can have everybody chime in. It's a whole lot easier for us to manage than as busy as we are carrying on 30 conversations about somebody's opinion on this. I appreciate the interaction, but we can't handle any more text messages and private messages with people.
Amen to that.
It's overwhelming some days, but I enjoy it. It's a blessing when most of your conversations every day can be about deer hunting. That's for sure.
Hey, before we shift gears, I want to mention something else if I can. I'm going to totally change gears totally here.
Okay.
William Miller, the young man who bought my bow at Shipshawana last year, he took that bow to Canada this week, Manitoba, I think, and shot a big black bear with it. I want to give a shout out to William. He's been a great supporter of the podcast and all that we do. And, he bought that bow for $5,000 with the proceeds going to Lester's feet. And he shot no, he didn't shoot a buck with it yet because he just got it. He did shoot a nice buck on his farm last winter or last fall, but just want to shout out to him for congratulations on that big bear he shot up in Manitoba.
Yeah, and he could have gone and bought that same bow at a Matthews dealer and it not shot any better or any worse than the one he got from you. But he chose to do a charity auction, and all of that money actually went to our good friend Kenny at Tagout, who's battling cancers. It's pretty cool when we can go up to that Midwest Sportsman's Classic every year. FAE is the primary sponsor of it, and they put on such a good show. But when we can bring that many people together and then raise money and it stays in the community for somebody that was also tied to that show, that's pretty humbling and pretty special. But that's cool that he got to shoot a black bear with that. It's definitely on my bucket list, but if his generosity shows the type of person he is, and he's, like you said, he's listened to us for a long time.
Well, his mom and dad did a good job with that young man, and I'm guessing he's somewhere around 18, 20 years old, but I'm telling you, he's one of the most polite, considerate young men you'll ever talk to, just very, very courteous. And so hats off to mom and dad. You did a good job.
All right. Well, before we go to the Higgins hot seat segment, did you get a chance to listen to Chasing Assurance this week, or were you too busy?
I did not listen to it yet. Definitely
All
on my
right.
list to do, though.
We got a bunch of great feedback from people. We had, of course, some technical issues with trying to get set up on a new show, but I think we got all of that taken care of. So the one thing you try to think of everything, Don, right? You know, you got all this stuff running through your head. You got sponsors that have been so gracious to help you kickstart the thing before you even recorded an episode. And I forgot one major thing, and that is the Lester's Feet segment of that show. Our friends at Coonless Feeders sponsor that Lester's Feet segment. And our friend Emerson Day gave us the rights to use her song Middle of a Miracle to basically highlight a family every week. So here I am thinking, oh, we're going to put this great little video. And we talked about a young lady who had breast cancer 3 years ago that we helped the family. She was just out of high school. It was before we had the Andrea Hamilton Fund. But we featured her. She filmed this little segment giving an update on herself and saying, you know, thanks to everybody. And we played all these pictures with Emerson's song playing in the back. And then stupid me realized that most of our listeners listen on audio platforms, and they didn't get to see any of the video that we put together. So it's basically Emerson's song playing for 4 minutes. So I apologize about that. And I'm not sure the solution for those who listen on audio platforms, but maybe we'll put that out, the video part of just the Lester's Feet segment, out separately, so people that listen on the audio platform can go to social media somewhere and just watch the pictures of the family this week. While I'm talking about Lauren Gritt, her dad's actually a taxidermist and listens to the podcast, so maybe he'll comment below. But I was talking to them this week, and they were thanking me for the tribute to her on there. But we did mention that she had a procedure that we were asking for prayers that everything would kind of be routine and no kind of further action taking place. Was she didn't get quite the news that she wanted. It's not bad yet, but it's obviously just enough that they're concerned. So I'm just going to leave it at that. So the family that we mentioned this past week on episode 1 of Chasing Assurance podcast, Lauren Gritt, please keep her in your prayers, as she's still, this isn't a quick fix with people that navigate breast cancer. So keep her in your prayers. This week, we're going to feature a family. Her name is Magnolia. And the podcast actually helped out a lot. She was born with ALS, and I forgot. I'm going to be put on the spot and say the thing that she has, what she was born with, but she had to go have surgeries, multiple surgeries, as she was an infant. And I don't know if you remember this or not, Don, but we mentioned it on the podcast that the family had a dog. And one of our listeners volunteered to house sit the dog while they were in Florida getting all of these procedures. So full circle coming around, you guys are going to get to see little Magnolia now as a toddler and how she's progressed with her condition over the years. So I'm excited. The podcast itself went great. Dad's just such a good talker and minister to that. And the highlight of this week is talking about how God wants us to know we have assurance. So we have sometimes this doubt where we have to, live our life and we only go to heaven because of our works. But the way the Bible teaches us is that we have assurance and God wants us to know it. And what does that mean? So I hope you all tune into episode 2. It will air Wednesday morning. So I hope you all enjoy that. Let's move on to the Higgins hot seat segment of the week, brought to us by 360 Blinds. I will say that my 360 Osseo Chasing Giants blind is in, and our good friends from 360 were planning on traveling out this week, but we had to postpone that visit. So mine's still sitting in the shed, so I'm waiting to put it out. So really excited to get that out on the farm and make a video for Chasing Giants TV. But Don, it came to mind when you were talking about a couple things that's been on this podcast. Number one, you picked up your turkey that you shot on my farm, and you're right, the mount looks absolutely phenomenal. It might be the best turkey I've ever seen mounted. And then our friend that shot the bear on his hunting trip. So if somebody walks into your trophy room, they're going to see a moose. They're going to see a bunch of giant whitetail. I think there's a beaver in there. There's an antelope, I think, in the shed. Is that right?
Yep.
And is there any other species that you got?
Oh, I've got a mule deer that he's in the shed with the antelope.
So at this point in your hunting career, is there anything else that's on the bucket list or even an ounce of interest that you want to do at this point? I mean, we talked real serious about going on a grizzly bear hunt with Chris Yates at one point, and we ended up, that was the year he had his heart attack, and we backed out, and he still went. But we talked about doing that one year. Is there anything else that even has an inkling of appeal to you at this point in your life and your hunting career?
Yeah, there is, but to be honest, I'm in such terrible physical shape. The things that I would like to do, I'm probably not capable of anymore. You know, I've always wanted a big elk, but I'm not fit for climbing the mountains and probably never will be again in my life. I've been elk hunting, so I know that experience. I'd like to shoot a bear, I guess, but I'm not going to Canada with the issues of leaving the country and all that. I just can't see myself going to Canada to shoot a bear. You know what? The older I get, it's more about the experience and the people that I'm around. And one thing that I would really like to do is I would like to get a group of friends, and I'm talking a fairly large group, like maybe a dozen. And I would like to go to some ranch in Texas in maybe January, late January, early February, sometime in the wintertime. And I'd like to go down there and spend at least 3 to 5 days on a ranch where we're all at the same ranch. We take turns hunting with different people in the group for the day. We come in the evening and we have a big meal prepared for us, and we're all sitting around the table, maybe have a Bible study each evening where there's a different person each evening that leads the different Bible study. I would like to have us all go down on a big charter bus, so we're not all driving in separate vehicles. We got a different person driving, paid to drive the bus, take us down there, and we're all just in the back of that bus, you know, talking, having a good time on the way down and the way back, and then we spend all that time on this ranch. And I want the ranch to have multiple species of game, so like we can go out and we can shoot wild hogs, we can shoot deer, we can shoot some of the exotics, we can shoot whatever. Each person can basically shoot what they want, hunt for what they want, and I think that is probably the last thing on my bucket list as far as hunts go. Outside of, you know, I've got some things in the whitetail woods I still want to do, but I think a hunt like that, where there's no pressure on anybody to drive, we're having good meals prepared for us, and we're out on this huge ranch, and, you know, each guy can, you know, hunt at their own pace. If they want to stay out all day, they can stay out all day. If they want to come in and take a nap and have lunch, they can do that. But every evening, you know, we're all sitting around the table together, telling about what we've seen that day on our hunt, and then maybe having a 30-minute Bible study before or after supper, you know. I think that is my ultimate hunt that I've got in my mind that I want to do before I get too much older, actually. And I actually looked into doing this a few years ago, and I was going to even pay for it for all my friends. And gee, man, I'm telling you, by the time I added up the cost, you know, I was over 50 grand. And it's like, well, I like you guys, but I don't know if I like you 50 grand. And actually, it was more like in the 60s. And I think, so what I'm thinking, you know, is maybe if I would spring for maybe the bus, and then everybody that went had to spring for their hunt. But, you know, I'd like to there's just about a dozen close friends that have been with me for decades and have stuck close by that I would like to take. Joe and Al would be a couple of the guys that I'd want to go for sure.
Dwayne
and you and Steve Shields and several others. I mean, I would probably have a hard time cutting it off at 12 people, but I'd have to figure something out. I'm guessing it wouldn't work in some people's schedules or whatever, but that's what I would like to do. That's my last big hunting dream, I guess, is for that trip to happen.
Well, I know a lot of people get to experience hunt camp but there's also some listeners to us that understand how lonely it is what we do. When there's only 2 or 3 people that even sees the deer you're getting on trail camera, you don't get to talk about it. You know, everything has to be so quiet until you can tell the story afterwards with video documentation. But you did a profile of big buck killers one time, and one of those was their loners. And I don't think probably some of our listeners fully understand how lonely trophy hunting, like what we're trying to do, is, and then they fully understand it while others don't, because they enjoy that hunt camp. And there's part of it that I'm really jealous of with the people that get to do that every year in such a low pressure environment. So it's not really what we've kind of given our path to, but I fully understand why people do that. It's such a special thing to do it with the people that you're close with.
Yeah, and if any of our listeners know of a good Texas ranch that might be able to accommodate such a event, drop me a message, and I'll look into it, because that is absolutely on my bucket list, and I would love to check that off. I mean, we're all getting older. Al Foster just turned 72 this week. Before I start losing, some of my friends, or are we getting bad enough health that we can't do it, I'd like to make that a reality.
All right. Yeah, and there might even be some people listening on this that's done a trip like this. So the more you guys can help us learn about this, I think the better. But yeah, I think that it's out of all the stuff that you've done, turning the focus more to being about the people, that says a lot about the journey that you've been at, because you've given a lot of your life to what's on that wall on the other side of your camera right now, and what matters now, the people.
Absolutely. And on this trip, I don't even care if I shoot anything. The highlight of the day, I'm thinking, is going to be the evening meal when we hear the stories from everybody and what they've seen that day. So if I kill anything, I'd like to kill a black buck. I think black buck are really neat animals. They're not very big, those little antelope, and there's a lot of them in Texas. I'd like to shoot a black buck, and I wouldn't care if I shot anything else. If a wild hog comes by, yeah, I'll shoot it too. But if I don't shoot anything, it's just going to be the time spent with good friends that's going to be the real trophy from that trip.
No work, no social media. You got to separate from that phone and just get away.
Yep.
The closest thing to getting you on a cruise ship that we'll ever do, right? Is a
party bus. I have no desire to be on cruise ships either.
A party bus going to Texas is the closest Don's ever going to be to a cruise ship.
Wouldn't that be neat, though, that nobody had to worry about driving? It was all in one vehicle, and we could all have conversation the whole way down and the whole way back. I just think that would be fantastic.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun. I can tell you, just hanging out with Joe and Al for a couple of days when they're in town turkey hunting is the most you laugh. Austin Razor came down last time, and we just sat and laughed and laughed and laughed. So many fun stories and just good time. So, all right. Well, thanks to 360 Blinds for the Higgins Hot Seat segment. We're going to transition now. We did not get a lot of questions answered last week. So Midwest Land Group, again, if you're looking for a career or a property, make sure you visit Midwest Land Group. We'll be right back with our first listener submitted question of the week.
Don't risk your most valuable asset with a part-time agent. Most real estate agents are part-time, working another job, trying to scratch together a few extra bucks in real estate as a side gig. Their inexperience will cost you thousands at closing. Not at Midwest Land Group. They only hire full-time professionals. Their agents are passionate about the outdoors, highly trained, and committed to maximizing the value of your land. If you're interested in selling your land, don't risk it with a part-time agent. Visit MidwestLandGroup.com.
Thanks for what you guys do. I hope your daughter is doing well. I haven't heard any updates on her battle. She's in our thoughts and prayers. Good luck this upcoming season. Well, Houston, I have planted sunflowers in the past. I would plant them in the spring, about the time you'd plant corn and soybeans. And the issue with them, as you mentioned, is when that sunflower head is formed, but it's not, the seed is not hard yet, it's still soft and spongy, the deer just destroy the sunflower heads. They just eat them down to nothing. And you got to have a pretty big patch to end up with many sunflower seeds. The other thing is once those sunflower seeds are ripe, the birds just absolutely devour them. Every Tweety bird in the county will be in your sunflower patch, picking away at the sunflowers. I do like the idea of planting them and then overseeding with a fall plot. In fact, after getting your question, I've been thinking about doing that. It's too late for this year. I just don't have a plot where I could do it. But next year, I'm considering that. I think it's a great idea. It helps set your property apart from your neighbors. It's something the deer absolutely love. In fact, the old guy buck that Terry shot on my place, I've got pictures of that buck in the sunflower patch, and maybe I'll send one of them to Terry so he can put it up on the screen while we're answering this question. But I think it's a great idea. Sunflowers are high oil, and to tell a little sunflower story. So probably, man, it's been a long time ago. I'm thinking about my daughters when they were on this trip with us. It must have been about 30 years ago, or real close to 30 years ago, when I had the captive deer. We took a trip to the Wisconsin Dells, to some of the water parks up there, and took the girls. It was in the summertime. And there's a big deer breeder up there, Wilderness Whitetails, owned by the Fleece family. And at that time, they had probably the biggest deer in captivity anywhere in North America. And while we was up there, I wanted to visit the farm, so I called and arranged a visit with them. And we showed up in the evening. They thought the evening would be a better time for us to be able to see the deer as they came, out of the shade and up to the feeders. And so while we was there, Mrs. Fleece was feeding these deer, and they had, they lived up a long lane, and as you go up the lane, there was these sunflowers in different stages of growth growing along their driveway and in one of these fields. They was planting every 2 weeks. They would plant a patch of sunflowers, and they'd move over and they'd plant some, and every 2 weeks they'd keep doing that. And she was feeding these deer. She would go out and cut 5-gallon buckets full of the heads off of these sunflowers. They weren't fully mature yet, but they were at that stage where the seed was there. That seed was still really soft. It was just something to see her dumping these 5-gallon buckets of these sunflower heads in these big long troughs, and these 200 to 300 inch bucks just come out of the shade and just converge on them troughs and eat them sunflower heads. And they were doing that because of the fat level in that. Sunflowers are like an oil seed. They're high in oil, just like soybeans. And the fat content in those heads would give those bucks, and the fiber as well. So, that fiber would help with digestion, to bind up the whatever it was they were eating. And when I came home from that trip, I had the idea, man, I'm going to grow sunflowers. Well, in my attempts to grow sunflowers, the deer would wipe them out because I was planting smaller patches. But there is some, merit in planting sunflowers for deer, and they do mature early enough that you could easily go in and overseed that sunflower patch with a fall planted plot of, deadly dozen, harvest salad, whatever you wanted. So great idea, and I'd encourage people to do it, actually.
I don't know if it's going to work or not, but all of my corn patches this year, I ran my 4-row planter, a perimeter around all of them with 4 rows of sunflowers that you could see from the house. So we have a family member that's very elderly that sits on the porch a lot. So instead of just seeing a wall of corn, I wanted her to be able to see sunflowers as something to bring out some color for her. So when I got my new corn planter this year, I went and Green Prairie got me some sunflower seeds and just filled the corn planter up. And that was my perimeter of all of my corn patches. So we'll see how it does this year. They're coming up pretty good, but yeah, I'm interested to see if the deer hammer them and eat them before they get to enjoy them too much.
Well, I bet they do, no doubt about it.
I will say, you mentioned overseeding. Since we're in the habit of asking our listeners for a bunch of help, if anybody knows of someone who does seeding with a drone in the central or northern Kentucky area, please have them get in touch with me. I'm wanting to go ahead and line that up for this fall to get someone to overseed all of my plots. So if you know somebody in that business, get them to me. I know Don had somebody do his last year. I want to have mine done. So question number 2.
Okay, this one comes from Jason Hesselberg from Manchester, Michigan. It says, Don and Terry, thanks for an awesome podcast and all the content that you provide us. My question concerns the forest fires in Canada, which are sending smoke into the U.S. On certain days we can see the smoke, but every day is like a hazy day with no sunshine for the last few weeks. It doesn't warm up like it should in June. I'm thinking it's because of all the smoke blocking the sun. I'm wondering what the effect of cooler temperatures and the lack of sunshine will do to the deer's antler growth. Will this be another down year for antler growth like it was 2 years ago? Jason, that's a good question, but I think it's a little bit early to be asking that. But, in regards to that smoke and the haze, yeah, we've had the very similar conditions through the spring and early summer here so far. It sounds like that's going to end tomorrow with the high temperatures in the mid-90s for at least 5 days. So the sun's going to eventually work its way through. The interesting thing to me is, and this just shows you how loony the liberals are. They've been spraying them, whatever it is, a jet stream or whatever, to kind of cloud the earth and protect us from global warming. Have you heard about that? Yeah, so they're putting this stuff in the air, flying it on, and it's supposed to block the sun to protect us from global warming. Well, these are the same idiots that are out there promoting all the solar panels. So here they are wanting us to build solar panels everywhere, and they're champions of that cause. And then what are they doing? Then they're going out and blocking the sun. It just shows how loony them nuts are.
I think we need to figure out how to get a volumetric measurement of the smoke coming from Canada and put a big tariff on it and actually tax them for sending their pollution and smog across the line and sending it to us. I think we need to turn it into a revenue generation for our country and get out of our however many $1 trillion debt. I read some stats the other day. Every taxpayer in the country, if we were going to pay off the national debt, would have to fork up $330,000 and some change. Every taxpayer in the country, $330,000. So yeah, let's start taxing the smoke blowing across the border. What do you think?
Well, I'm curious. It seems in recent years this has been an annual thing, hasn't it? I mean,
think so.
Yeah, so what are they doing up there? Are they just setting forest fires?
Maybe the liberals are lighting the forest on fire to blow the haze across us to protect us from global warming. It could all be a conspiracy.
Well, it's not a conspiracy when it comes true. So, you know what's going on? These people are so nutty. I mean, they're a champion of electric vehicles, and then when Elon gets in power and starts trimming government waste, trying to save tax dollars, doing us all a huge favor, then all of a sudden they're against electric vehicles and they burn them up. These people don't care about the environment. They're just a bunch of fruitcakes.
All right, question 3.
This one comes from Sean Pearson from Staples, Minnesota. It says, hello, Don and Terry. I've been going through the older podcasts and I've heard it said that your preferred time to be in the woods in Illinois, Iowa, and Ohio is November 5th through the 12th. In my experience, I have observed a significant decline in overall mature buck sightings during this period. This past year was no exception. It seems like most mature bucks start moving during daylight hours around October 27th. In the past, that's when I have typically started hunting mornings. So my question is, are my observations due to an increase in hunting pressure, lockdown, or do you think it's being further north in central Minnesota is playing a factor in this? Terry, curious, with you being further south, when do you see an increase in morning activity on your home farm, assuming the weather is running average? Well, Sean, you know what? That's a trend that I see as well. If I compare recent seasons to, say, 30 years ago, I see way more late October activity. And, and I've preached for a long time, don't hunt mornings in October. And for probably 20 straight years, I did not hunt a single October morning. But in recent years, it's just became so obvious that the deer activity in late October, and I'm talking the last 10 days of October, the last third of the month, if you get a cold front, you need to be hunting mornings in October. And I was never doing that for, like I said, 20 years plus. And I don't know, I don't have an explanation for it. So I still think that for the typical deer hunter on the average fall with average weather, that 5th through the 12th period is probably peak time for seeing the most bucks. However, I've become a huge proponent of watching the weather. And when those cold fronts come through, It doesn't matter if it's still October, especially those last 10 days. You need to be in the woods in the morning. And the year I shot the male is a perfect example. I shot male on the morning of October 30th, and the deer activity was fantastic because we just had a cold front push through. Right after that cold front pushed through, the first few days of November, it warmed up, and the deer activity died off. There was actually more deer activity right there the last couple, 3 days of October than there was the first few days of November. That was all because of the cold front more than anything else. Temperatures went from below average for that time of the year, and then when November comes around, temperatures rise above average for that time of the year, and it just shut down deer activity. So I think a lot of it has to do with the weather fronts, and it seems to me, it may just be me, but it seems to me that we have had more October cold fronts the last few years than we used to get.
And the early November's been warmer. We have a cold front, and it doesn't get cold in early November.
Right. That's what I've seen, and I think it's more based on the recent weather patterns than anything else. And your location in Minnesota probably plays into that as some as well. But I'm not going to argue whatsoever with your observations. In fact, I agree with them.
I don't know that I can answer the question for two reasons. Number one, I don't spend much time during the rut in Kentucky. Usually I hunt Kentucky in September really hard if I have a target buck here, and then what time I can hunt, I'm going after something in Illinois. At least that's what it's been for the last 10 years, 12 years. But also the observation I have is that you can't make a assumption of what this topic is by looking at trail camera data. The only way you make this observation is sitting in the woods, looking at the downwind side of a bedding area, because you don't get a good perspective of how many deer are out moving and chasing by a trail camera unless you're running a whole lot of them. I mean, and the only reason I say that is this past year, we've talked openly on this podcast about how some events that happened to me a year ago ended up being the biggest blessing ever. You called it the day it happened. I was able to hunt for the first time ever in my life every day, I think except for two, from October 24th to November 16th or 18th. And I was in the woods on the downwind side of a bedding area every single day. And what I saw putting in that many hours is so much different than what trail camera data would have given me. So that's why when you do your rut report, that's why people need to pay attention to it, because you're in the woods every day, not just trying to make an observation from a camera. But I will say that this year, at least hunting in Illinois, I saw more activity November 14th, 15th, and 16th than I did the first week in November. And I'd have to go back and actually look at the weather and the wind direction. But I mean, you look at all of the B-roll footage. I mean, we have hours and hours of footage that we recorded this past year from the tree. We got a whole lot more movement the weekend I shot my buck than we did through the first week of November.
What was the date you shot your buck?
Well, I knew you were going to ask that. It was either the 16th or the 18th. I'm looking right now. Hold on.
There was a lot of deer activity when you shot that deer. Actually, Wes shot his deer.
There was a cold front in October that there was just you watch social media, there was just a huge amount of giants killed. And then there was a section in November around when I killed that deer, a bunch of big deer got killed.
Well, Wes shot his buck on my farm a day or two after you did.
Mm-hmm.
Actually seen it that day.
You look at the buck activity that I videoed for the 3 days prior to me getting that shot, and I mean the bucks were just going nuts. I mean, it was just an all-day parade with them walking around. But I'm looking here. By the time how about I put the next question up, and by the time you get done answering that next question, I should know this answer, but I don't. It's either the 16th or I don't have a good memory, people, when it comes to numbers.
The next question comes from Nate from Byron, Minnesota. It says, Don and Terry, my question is, if you were only able to choose a tractor for your land or a Ranger Can-Am, which one would you choose and why? I have 40 acres to work with. I put food plots in, cut and split wood when the time is right, and anything else that arises on the property. I asked this same question to my kids, and they are split, so I come to you guys for your wisdom and to get the final say. Thanks, guys, for staying true to who you are and always speaking the truth. God bless to you and your families. Well, Nate, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind. I don't even have to think about this. I would buy a tractor. And I can tell you, you can do so much more with a tractor than you can ever do with a side-by-side. I know they make these little implements for a side-by-side, but take my word for it, those side-by-sides are not heavy enough to pull very much at all. You start sinking a piece of equipment into the dirt, and that side-by-side is light enough, it's just going to sit there and spin its wheels. I had a tractor. I owned a tractor decades before I owned a side-by-side. In fact, I think I've only owned a side-by-side in the last probably less than 5 years. It's just been real recent that I've had a side-by-side, but I've had a tractor for decades. And you can do so much more with that tractor. You can buy all kinds of implements. You know, you talk about your firewood. You can get these little three-point carts that go on the back that you can just pick it up and back it right in, so much easier than a trailer. You can do 100 times more with a tractor than a side-by-side. I don't even have to think about your question. Buy a tractor and buy the biggest one that you can afford. Don't buy some little rinky-dink 20, 30 horse tractor. Get at least a 50, a 70 or an 80 horse would be better, or even if you can afford it, 100 horse. The bigger the tractor, the more you can do with it, but definitely a tractor over a side-by-side.
That 50 horse tractor is the pivot point where you can do some real serious work and still be somewhat mobile with it. You get over 50 horse into that 70 range, most likely you're having to haul on a gooseneck, but there's a lot of 50 horse tractors out there that you can still have enough loader capacity to pick up a skid of mineral. If you got ballast on the back, you can run some decent size implements. You know, I've owned several tractors in different sizes from subcompact all the way up to big tractors. And if I could only pick one, it would be somewhere in that 50 to 60 range where you were somewhat still mobile to haul if you needed to, but still do some work. But I tell you what, after going to the big tractor like I have this, I don't ever want to go back. I mean, there's sometimes that I wish I even had a little bit more than what I have now, but that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, I've got two tractors. I've got a 115 horse, and then I've got a 30 horse. And you can do some things with that 30 horse, but I'm telling you, you could do so much more with a 50 horse tractor. I would definitely not buy anything smaller than a 50 horse if that was my only tractor.
Yep. And the answer to the magic question is the 16th, Don. I thought it was the 16th, but something was making me think 18th for some reason. But yeah, there was a pocket around there where a bunch of deer were shot, and it was cold.
You shot that deer on the 45th anniversary of my first buck. November 16th, 1979, I shot my first deer. You shot yours 45 years to the day later.
Had you told me that?
I didn't realize it until just now.
Huh. Interesting.
Yep.
All right. Next question.
This one comes from Scott Hesselberg from Moline, Illinois. Says, Don and Terry, thanks for putting on the #1 podcast in the hunting industry. My question is about when a buck reaches his biggest rack. I know there's a lot of things contributing to this, but I've been hearing a lot of big names in the hunting industry talk about how they believe they do not reach their highest potential until at least 8.5. They have a lot of theories that they talk about and why this is, but I was wondering what your thought process was. You do have the farm that could get a buck to that 8 or 9 years of age because it being so isolated. Some experts have even shown pictures of bucks that are 5.5 and are only in the 150 to 160 class, then at 8.5 blew up into the 200-inch class. I was wondering if you ever thought about letting one get to that age class. I know you like to harvest some of the younger bucks without great genetics to get them out of the herd, but I was just wondering if some of those bucks have eluded the hunters on your farm and made it to that 8 or 9 years of age and had a huge increase in antler growth. Thanks for answering my question. Well, Scott, there was a buck that was shot by my neighbor like a couple of years back that I just kept past him because I thought he had potential. He was a 6 typical, and had many trail camera pictures of him over the years, and I'd planned to let him just keep going, see what he would do. His rack pretty much stayed the same from the time he was about 4 years old until he was killed at 9.5 years old. The buck Terry shot that we called the old guy, how old was that buck when you sent his teeth in, Terry? Was he 10? 10 and a half?
Mm-hmm.
10 and a half. He did not put on inches over time. Just
His
basically,
biggest rack was 4.
yeah. And so then another buck that comes to mind, he was not on my farm, but just listening to your description of these guys saying these bucks put on a lot of inches later. Trump, whenever Trump went from 5.5 to 6.5, he put on at least 35 inches between 5.5 and 6.5. And then at 7.5, which was the year I shot him, he was put on maybe an additional 5 inches or so, not a whole lot. Another buck on my farm, Smokey, he put on 20 inches from 5.5 to 6.5. I think what we got to realize is that every buck is different, just like every person is different. We know people who as teenagers were built like men. That doesn't mean they never grew anymore, but bucks mature at different stages. Their ceiling or what their potential is not going to change, based on age so much. Now, when they reach that is going to vary from buck to buck, but I have no doubt. I know of another buck here in Illinois that scored 214 when he was shot at 9.5 years old. That was his biggest rack at 9.5. But I know of plenty of other bucks who grew their best rack at 3 or 4 years old and never added inches after that. And Terry's buck is a perfect example. It actually lost inches the older he got. So I think it definitely holds true with some bucks. What the percentage is, I have no idea. But I think probably for everyone that has a big growth spurt in those later years, 8, 9, 10 years old, there's that many more that go the opposite direction. So yeah, it's got some merit, but I'm not going to let a 150-inch 4-year-old or 3-year-old live when there's two his same age that are 170 inches. I'm not going to take a chance that the 170s get pushed off the farm by one that's smaller. So I'm not going to be purposely letting bucks go to that age just because I want to see if they get bigger.
I want to say something very clear to all the listeners that I am not either saying this opinion is wrong or right. The problem I have with it is there's not enough statistical data when people make these observations and write these articles, which are solely intended to get engagement and people to read their stuff. Because what they're not telling you is, yeah, they might show an example of 1 or 2 deer, but where is the sample size of 8.5-year-old wild deer? Guys, there isn't that many of them to even sample that have the documentation of people that had trail camera pictures like we've had on deer on your farm. There just isn't a way to statistically analyze this, in my opinion, and in the wild deer, that is. Captive deer, obviously, they can do it. But, my question is, for every one of these deer that he says blows up at 8.5, is there 2 that go down? Is there 10 that go down? Is there 30 that go down? Is there 500 that go down? Mm-hmm. You're hearing one side of it, and I think you have to take it for a grain of salt depending on the data that they're providing with this observation, because they might be talking about the one middle school kid that was already 6'4" with a full beard in 8th grade. Right. Or they might talk about the guy that had a growth spurt in college that was always the runt that didn't make the basketball team, and then all of a sudden he gets to college. I think about the NBA player Anthony Davis that played for Kentucky. He was a point guard all the way through college, and he shows up to play at Kentucky, and he's 7 foot tall with this huge wingspan and ends up being the best player in basketball that year. Nobody would have ever seen that coming, right? So I don't know the data or even who the expert that he's talking about is, but I would just caution you when you read this stuff to say, where's the data points for the other side of the statistical analysis versus cherry picking one example that's going to get people to read an article or a Facebook post.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sure there's the bucks that do exactly what he's talking about.
No doubt.
And I agree also with Terry that there's a lot of information that's thrown out there just for the idea of getting engagement, whatever that engagement might be, whether it's clicks on social media or whatever. So it's not going to change how I manage my farm. I think I'm getting it dialed in. I don't claim to have all the answers, and I'm a student. I'm always trying to get better and learn more, but I'm pretty sure I'm on the right track based on the results I'm seeing here.
Folks, at the end of the day, if you find an 8.5-year-old buck and you can do statistical analysis, there's not a very big sample size. I wish there was. I wish that our DNRs would put stuff in place that we could get the age structure to where we had that, but I don't know that there's enough deer to draw a conclusion one way or another.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I can only think of 2 on my farm in all the years that I've been managing that made it past 7.5, and that would be the one you shot and the one I just talked about that got shot by the neighbor, and both of them went downhill as they got older. Neither one of them
the
got better.
Time buck went down.
Yeah, but he hurt his leg, so I'm guessing that injury.
He had an injury, but anyway, good question. I think it's interesting. I mean, we've been talking about observations that we heard, so I don't blame this guy for asking the question.
No, I don't either.
He heard an observation, but I think when we hear these things, just come out maybe all of us took a stats class in high school, or where we look at where is the sample size, how many deer are they looking at, how many deer are they studying. You make these, and it goes back to what I said earlier about drawing conclusions about deer movement by trail cameras, and why I like your rut report so much, because there's very few hunters that are in the woods every day. And I got my first opportunity to do that last year. And what I saw versus trail camera data was night and day difference.
Yep, I agree. There's no substitution for time in the woods. Real firsthand experience. I just recorded another podcast earlier today with Jake Hofer. That was with Exodus, and now he's with the Whitetail podcast. And we talked about that. So
he's doing a good job with that podcast. Make sure you check that out.
Yep.
Again, thanks for all the support. We announced last week the new ownership of Novix. They actually put out a video with the new owner, and was excited to see that. A lot of positive feedback came. The former owner, our good friend Jeff Weaver, was excited about the news. So just super happy for him, and all of our partners are just got such great things going on with all of them. Yeah, it's we're very blessed to be in the middle of a show with so many people around that surround us, and obviously all the listeners every week. We're very extremely blessed and appreciate everybody so much.
Absolutely. So see you back here, everyone. God bless. Have a great week.
A young boy asked the Greek philosopher Socrates to show him the path to wisdom. And Socrates says, "Meet me down at the river tomorrow at dawn." So the boy is down at the river the next day, and at dawn, Socrates walks down there, and they wade out into the river. And Socrates holds the boy under the water and keeps him there underneath the water for 30 seconds and pulls him up out of the water and says, "What is it that you seek?" And he says, "Wisdom." Gasping, he pushes him back underneath the water, holds him there again for another 30 seconds, pulls him back up, and says, "What is it that you seek?" He says, "Wisdom." This time he pushes him back under the water again and holds him there even longer. Pulls him back out, he's gasping, and says, "What is it that you seek?" And he says, "Air." And Socrates replies, "When you want wisdom as much as you have just wanted air, then you will begin to find wisdom." And his point is that wisdom can only be gained with determined effort. When you're fighting as if you're fighting for survival, That's how bad you have to want wisdom. And today I'm going to talk about wisdom. And I'm certainly not a qualified expert on wisdom, but in a previous prayer talk, I talked about living a life of faith, not fear. And I said that faith is spelled R-I-S-K, risk. And I think that that's balanced with what I want to talk about today, and that's wisdom. And that's not near as exciting to talk about having self-control or having balance or having moderation, having discernment, all things that come with wisdom. That's not near as fun and exciting, but it's so important on our day-to-day decisions, on the decisions that we make in life, whether it be in business, occupationally, relationships, families, financially, but most important, eternally or spiritually, the decisions that we make. There's no doubt in 2025 that we live in a world that is constantly gaining more knowledge, more information. We as humans are gaining more knowledge and information at a faster rate than we ever have before. I heard one pastor compare social media to the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it's, we're not really humans created to decipher the vast inputs that social media gives us. But we can use social media for good, and certainly that's what we want to use our platform. But we're certainly in a world where humans are getting smarter and smarter. We know more than we ever have before. But are we getting wiser and wiser? I would say no. And I'm going to read some verses here that where true wisdom, not knowledge, but wisdom is found. The fear of the Lord, Psalm says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's where wisdom starts out. I'm gonna read just a list of verses on wisdom, and I encourage you, if you're wanting to become a wiser person, read the book of Proverbs. It's a great place to start. I think as someone like Song of Solomon, who is known to be the wisest person in the world, and God asked him if he could have anything, what would he want, or what did he want? And let's say that God posed that question to you. In 2025, if God asked you that question right now, what would you say? If God said, I will give you anything right now, what do you want? Would you say long life? Would you say all the money in the world? Would you say 1,000-acre farm? What would you say? And Solomon said he wanted wisdom, and God granted that to him. And there's so much wisdom to be gleaned from that in and of itself. Proverbs 2:6, for the Lord gives wisdom. From the Lord's mouth comes knowledge and understanding. Is not wisdom found among the aged? Does not long life bring understanding? The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. Though it cost all you have. Proverbs 11:2, when pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. Proverbs 16:16, how much better to get wisdom than gold, and insight rather than silver. A wise man listens and becomes wiser still. A wise son heeds instruction, but a mocker does not respond to rebuke. Wisdom, in the book of James, comes from heaven, is first of all pure, peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. James 1:5, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. And last but not least, a wise man has many counselors. There's a lot that we could dig into there, but there's a few that I want to point out. Is that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That a wise man listens and becomes wiser still, and that a wise man has many counselors. It's been said many times on this podcast. Different people, whether it be Don or I remember Bobby Worthington and Joe Miles both talked about the people and relationships that have come from deer hunting. And I think it's important that we surround ourselves with people that can give good insight into our lives. A wise man has many counselors and listens and becomes wiser still. But ultimately, God's word is the final authority for any decision that you're making in life. And God's word is active, sharper than any two-edged sword, and it's living, and it should be used in our decision making. I heard an analogy one time when talking about wisdom in this life, is that this life, if you think of life like a rope, and for those that are just listening and not watching on YouTube, I'm holding a rope. And just imagine this rope goes on and on and on, and just imagine it goes on forever. I've got a long rope here, but let's say this, just for this arguments, that this rope goes around the world many, many times. And at the end of this rope is this little bitty orange piece. And this is what our life is like. Is our 80 years, if we're blessed with that amount of time on earth, is like this little bitty piece at the end of this rope that goes on and on and on forever. And there's so many of us that are focused on what we can do in this time, in this 80 years, this section of the rope. And we're so focused on, I want to save all my money in this amount of time so that I can be relaxed and comfortable right here. And to me, that's so funny when you consider the rest of this rope. And if we're going to consider heavenly wisdom, is we want to consider the rest of this rope, is eternity, and the decisions that we make on earth, this little bitty section of the rope, are going to affect the rest of eternity. And so what are you doing in this section of the rope, this little bitty orange section? Are your decisions, the way that you're living your life, is it going to bless other people? And are you storing up treasures on earth or in heaven for the rest of eternity by what you're doing right here? So this week I was actually east of Louisville, Kentucky, knocking on some doors. I knocked on 42 doors to be exact, and I got 4 permissions, looking for some properties to do some hunting on, specifically in September. And when I knocked on, this is just a random stranger, when I knocked on one particular door, this was one of the ones that I got a yes on. After I went through my spiel of, can I deer hunt your property? And he said yes. The next thing that he asked me is, his very next question was, do you read the Bible? And it kind of caught me off guard, was his boldness, his frankness. I didn't realize we were going to have a spiritual conversation. And this guy just, that was his question, to lead into a different conversation. And he showed me around his property. His property was like 7 acres. It didn't take very long to see his property at all. It was like 7 acres in size. And as we're walking around his property, he asked me, have you been baptized? And I told him that I had, and he asked me why, and we talked about that for a while. And he went back up to his house, and I was hanging a trail camera. And when I got back to my truck, there was a paper on baptism on my truck with a Gatorade bottle or some sports drink, and I went on my way. And that encounter with that guy was just, it really struck me on, I hadn't known that guy for 10 minutes, and we were already having conversations on eternity. That was where his mind was focused. And I'm going to be hunting close to Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm going to take the meat, if I end up killing a deer, back to a homeless shelter in Louisville. And the guy texted me this morning. That was yesterday that I was knocking on doors, and he texted me this morning and said, hey, who's going to pay for the processing for that deer meat? And so this guy it's just been one thing after another of him going out of his way. I've heard it said before is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And just in a short encounter with that guy he was asking me if I'm reading the Bible. He gave me something to drink when it was 90 degrees out and I'm pouring sweat. He texted me this morning and asked me how the processing was going to be paid for to get to this homeless shelter. And just this guy just really made an impression on me on the way that he's living his life. Is he's not focused on this little bitty section here of the rope. Is he's thinking about, with all the people that he talks with, is all the rest of the rope, eternity. And he had a lot of biblical wisdom to share. So I'm going to say a prayer and have a great week. Chasing Giants family, it is almost the beginning of July. I can't wait to get out some more trail cameras and get some velvet bucks. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for the many blessings you've given us. And I just pray that you would give us wisdom. It's you say that if we ask for wisdom, that you will give it to us. And I pray that we would seek that in your word, in your scripture. And thank you for the people that you've placed in our lives. I pray that we would seek many counselors and many advice from lots of different people to get different angles, different perspectives from people older than us that have been through more life and can give us some discernment and direction on how they see different situations or relationships or things that we're going through. Just give us discerning hearts and wisdom that comes from God. Thank you for the opportunity to share with the Chasing Giants family, and I pray that they would have a blessed week. In your son's name we pray, Jesus. Amen.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.